the Empowered Parent Podcast. Today's conversation is one that so many parents need to hear, especially if you have ever felt stuck trying to manage behaviors that just do not seem to make sense. Things like homework battles, shutting down during reading, avoiding schoolwork, or refusing to even get started. It is easy to focus on what you see on the surface, the behavior, the resilience, the frustration. But what we often miss is what is actually underneath it all. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. I am joined by Stacey Curnow, founder of Asheville Family Counseling and licensed family therapist who specializes in supporting families navigating complex behaviors. Her work helps people shift from reacting to behavior to identifying the specific unsolved problems driving them. The approach is not more effective, it's transformative. So welcome, Stacey. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Jess, for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So let's just dive in. This is such an important topic. I have often heard from parents that they are worried about the behaviors like refusing to do homework or shutting down. And from your perspective, what are we missing when we focus only on behavior?
Well, when we focus only on behavior, we're seeing what I call the signal. It's like the smoke. It's not the fire. And so when we follow the smoke, right, when we look like what is causing, right, the smoke, we find problems, right? Not if we solve the problems, then we don't have the behaviors. That's just the bottom line. And so we have to get really curious. And the question that I like to ask is, what's making it hard for the child to meet my expectation? Because it's always that difficulty in meeting a certain expectation that's causing really the stress response. Remember, I said behavior is a signal that something's not working, the smoke, not the fire. But another way of saying it is they're having difficulty meeting my expectation, right? The school refusal, the tears when it's time to do homework is about that difficulty, right? That we haven't, again, clearly identified very often because we're so focused on you have to go to school or you have to do your homework that we don't think about what's making it hard for them to go to school, what's making it hard for them to get started on their homework.
I personally have two personal experiences of that. My children didn't have behavioral problems. However, I did. And I got held back in third grade and I started acting out. And I literally spent almost every single day of my second time in third grade at the principal's office because I was fighting with kids. I was causing problems in the classroom. And so that's my personal issue with my behavior problems because I couldn't read and all of my classmates moved on to the next grade and I got stuck back in third grade.
And again, think about it. That wasn't a behavior problem. That was a stress response due to this overwhelm as you're being asked, right, to read, to comply. Again, that's what a classroom is you're complying with the teacher's expectations. And if you can't, not meaning you won't, or you don't want to, or you're somehow lazy or just a bad kid, right, who's going to cause problems, then, right, that kid's frustration responses are just going to build and build until you see, right, those, again, stress responses. And I want to make it really clear that when the nervous system is overwhelmed, any vertebrate, right, whether it's a snake, a turtle, or a human being, when they are overwhelmed, right? When they perceive that they're not safe, which is how I would have imagined you as that little girl in third grade, right? There are four autonomic nervous system reactions, right? That's the fight, flight, freeze, or collapse. So the fight is I would pick fights with other kids. I was like, that wasn't you picking fights. That wasn't you consciously deciding like, how can I get to my right classmates? That was a nervous, like, we're going to fight, right? Or those kids who are they're calling it like eloping now, like leaving the classroom, just running out of the classroom, right? Or you have the freeze, you have the child who's just like the deer in the headlights, like, and again, doesn't look problematic like the fighting or the fleeing, but they're just a shut down, right? Or the child who collapses in tears, who can't do it. Yeah. So again, when we look at it from that framework, I wish, right? Don't we all wish that someone had been curious about you and not seen you just as a bad kid who's causing fights and doesn't want to learn, but as a child who is struggling to read, right, who wanted to meet expectations, because that's what we see with kids is, and everyone, right? Everyone would prefer to do better. They're not choosing, right, to not do well. And so again, if we can just keep shifting the lens to curiosity and compassion, then we're going to start getting some traction and not have these kids who are getting left behind
Mhm.
and punished for it, right? I'm sure if you look back at it, right, you felt confused and scared and hopeless, alone, right? And you didn't know how to make it better. And again, this is a no judgment, zone. I would say I don't have judgment for the parents or the teachers because nobody showed them, right? Nobody modeled for them this curiosity and compassion when they were growing up, right? So again, it's like we have to really adopt a whole paradigm shift where we really see that kids do well if they can, not if they want to. Yeah.
I love that tie-in because, like I said, I also had that experience or a similar experience with one of my kids, and I didn't realize it, but I had that shift because my child from first grade through fifth grade asked to be homeschooled, and I don't even know where they had learned about homeschooling from, but we chose not to because we were like, no, they need to learn how to deal with people and interacting, and if we pull them out of school, then that's not giving them an opportunity to learn this skill. And so, but in fifth grade, after this child had gone to therapy, was allowed to go to the counselor at school's office anytime he felt, he needed to leave.
Mhm.
Then it was 1 o'clock in the morning and he was up in the bathroom crying about going to school. And I told my husband, I am not sending him back to school. And I said, I'm going to figure this out. And I got online and I found, a unit study that I could have sent to me. And I started homeschooling that very next week because I was like, if I had a job I hated that much, I would quit. And so I'm not going to make my child continue to be in an environment that is not feeling safe for them.
Exactly. It really is safety. I mean, and again, I'm so glad that we're getting this language and that we're able to share it with our children because that wasn't our experience, right? Nobody was talking about, are you feeling emotionally safe in your classroom, Jess, when you were in third grade, right? Nobody was talking like that. So again, we have come so far that we can say, in fact, that learning is impossible when we don't feel emotionally safe, right? That becomes where there's so much great research right now that says, the hand model of the brain, that the prefrontal cortex flips when the limbic system starts sending signals of fear, of threat, of danger. So our prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our learning, is fully offline. So this idea that we can send our kids into these unsafe environments, these environments that they perceive that they don't feel safe, they're not going to learn anyway. And so we have to start really thinking about, are we creating the conditions for their learning, i.e., are we creating the conditional nervous system safety?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you just did that, and you did that. And I bet that was really, just as the family therapist in me who's very attachment based, I just think that was probably very healing for that little girl, that third grader in you, that on some level wish that someone would have noticed that you were being sent to this bad job that
Right.
was not working for you.
Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, my mom was a teacher,
Mhm.
so the fact that my mom was not aware of anything, I've had years of like, how did she not understand or realize this?
It's the
Um,
paradigm. It's a paradigm shift. I work with so many adult parents of adult children and they feel so guilty, ashamed, right? How could I not know? But I just keep, it's the culture. It's the culture. Like we
well,
didn't.
and
Mhm.
like you say, it's a paradigm. My mom was sent away to boarding school at age 10 or 11 because she couldn't read. She had dyslexia,
Yeah.
and so they sent her away to fix her. And then
Yes.
2 years later, she came back. And the
Yeah.
same thing happened to my uncle. They sent him away to boarding school for 1 year because he had dyslexia, although I don't think he was officially diagnosed. My
Yeah.
mother was officially diagnosed.
Yeah.
But so exactly what you're saying, like that was less than what her parents did to her.
Right, exactly. So again, it's a no blame approach for sure because nobody knew better and we certainly didn't get that modeled. And so to just kind of almost press the restart button and say, let's now we have so much more excellent information. Let's start orienting to this new way of looking at this problem and actually addressing in a way that works.
What do you feel is really happening underneath the behavior, like avoiding schoolwork and refusing to study?
Yes, that's such a great question. And it's really important that we highlight that we need to get really curious about what's difficult specifically for this child, because it's fascinating. The more that I do this work, let's say the child was having difficulty doing their math worksheet. What was making that difficult could have been very different from what's making it difficult for them to read the paragraph for reading comprehension. Yeah, so we can't just look at it as difficulty doing homework, right? And then we want to get even more specific because, again, it depends. And this is where parents, I just call it like they have to become stress detectives almost, really start paying attention when we start noticing a stress response and what was happening before it. Because again, it can be different things. And this can feel overwhelming to parents who are like, oh my gosh, it could be anything. It's like, yeah, it is. But it's certain skills that kids are lacking, right? When I share the skills that are very often at the root, right? Like these developing skills that aren't reliable yet, that are often the root of a lot of these frustration responses. Again, I have so many adults say, wait, I struggle with transitions. I struggle with sitting and doing tedious tasks, right? I struggle to manage my frustration, right? So these are all skills that I think human beings, like depending on the day, whether we've had good sleep, whether we're sick, whether, right, we've had a snack recently, how well we can expect to manage frustration or do a smooth transition. Yeah. So again, when we start thinking about it in terms of skills, and that even adults find these skills unreliable sometimes, and then we have these little people who they're just developing the skills. Of course they would struggle. So again, what's reliable is understanding that it's skills that are developing that are really at the root of this. But how do they learn the skills? Like we wouldn't teach, and again, this is where kids will often be sent to a child counselor to develop their emotional regulation skills. And there's certainly great things that they can learn and be supported in that environment. But in my belief, there's no better way to develop those skills than to practice them, right? Practice frustration tolerance by being supported to finish the math worksheet. Yeah. So we're not leaving them on their own, like, okay, no more iPad time until you finish your worksheet. Like that's no support, right? But, oh, tell me what's hard about the worksheet. And an example is when I was working with this one child, it was that the worksheet had 8 math problems on it. And there was, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And just seeing 8 problems, I see you nodding, right? Seeing 8 problems just overwhelmed his nervous system from the get-go, right? Like prefrontal cortex flipped. And so when he said, it's just so hard for me when I see those 8 problems, it's just too much, it's too soon, right? I can't do it. And then we asked, oh, well, what if we cut the worksheet into 8 little discrete, almost like, index size card problems. So then he would just have, he would have the little stack, right? But he would only see problem 1. And then when it was done, he put it aside, then it would be problem 2. He had no difficulty. Yeah, so this was not a kid who was having even trouble with math. He was having trouble with, again, kind of sitting with this frustration response with this overwhelm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an example. But if we had just said, you're being lazy or you're trying to manipulate, right? You want more time with the iPad, and we took away the iPad, we would have never been solving for the actual problem that was creating the difficulty for that child.
Absolutely. That is one of the accommodations that I suggest for students who feel overwhelmed with math is to blow up the assignment. I've never thought of cutting them into separate pieces, which would be less work for the teacher than to have to blow it up for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, and it just depends. I mean, that may have just only worked for that kid. But the beauty of it was that the solution actually came from the kid. The kid was actually like, if I only had to see one problem at a time, right? So that's one of the main takeaways I would love for your audience to get is that ask the child. Like when they say it's just too hard to see all the problems, like, well, what do you think would help with that? And they will often have a great solution. But if they don't, then that's when we could offer, like, what do you think about blowing it up? What do you think about cutting it into little bits? What do you think if we just talked it through and you didn't even have to look at the paper at all, right? So again, it's Ask the kid is really the takeaway.
And that's the evolution of parenting, because when I was raising my kids, we didn't ask them. We just tried to figure out solutions. But
Yes.
yeah, the fact that you're saying that they might have the perfect solution. My daughter was just saying how she would remember where things are by like landmarks that she would create. And she's always had this coping mechanism. She's 30 years old and she just shared it with me because I never asked her before. But we were at Disneyland and I just said to her, I'm so impressed by how you always can navigate your way around places.
Hmm.
So those tools were there when she was young. I just never asked her
Yes.
about them.
Before we dive into today's episode, we'd like to take a moment to thank our amazing sponsors who make this podcast possible. First up, we have 3D Learning Experts. If you or someone you love struggles with dyslexia, dyscalculia, or similar learning differences, 3D Learning Experts is here to help. They specialize in virtual tutoring for students of all ages. From first grade to adulthood, their expert tutors use the proven Orton-Gillingham method for language arts, structured and sequential program for writing success, and a multi-sensory approach to math. This ensures students enhance their reading, writing, spelling, and math skills in a way that suits their needs. Empowering students with confidence and success. That's what 3D Learning Experts is all about. To learn more, visit 3dlearningexperts.com. And when it's time to unwind, why not escape to fabulous Las Vegas with Casa Arce Vacations? Whether you're planning a quick getaway or a family reunion, Casa Arce Vacations offers 4 unique stays at one convenient location. Just under 3 miles from the Strip, choose from a cozy tiny house, 2 stylish studios, or a spacious 4-bedroom, 2-bath unit. All guests have access to amazing amenities, including a play pool, putting green, barbecue, fire pit, and each unit has its own private patio. Perfect for any occasion, they've got the ideal spot for your next adventure. Start planning your trip today at facebook.com/CasaRSA Vacations. Thank you to our sponsors for their support and for the incredible services they provide. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
So for parents listening, how can they tell the difference between a child who won't do something versus a child who can't meet the expectations of the class?
That's such a great question. And I would love for the takeaway to be it's always can't, it's never won't. And if we can just, again, do that, I call it the lens shift, right? Where we actually put on the glasses that say kids would do well if they could. And if they're not, it's because they can't. Something is getting in their way. It's never, in my experience, I've worked with hundreds of families, it's never about laziness. There's no, we
Right.
call it like a motivational reason. They're not lacking motivation. Again, kids will do well if they can, because doing well is preferable. Just
Right.
bottom line, like anyone would prefer to do well. And so when we really believe, right, and that's what's hard because, again, when the nervous system is overwhelmed, when we see the stress responses of fight, flight, freeze, or collapse, it can look willful, right? Like when they have the sharp tone with us, when they yell at us, when they call us names, right? We're thinking, oh my gosh, like they're choosing to be a stinker, right? Let's just say it. But no, I don't think it's a choice. I think that's a nervous system, like unconscious, autonomic reaction. And when we can see that again as the smoke, and then get curious about the fire, right? It's almost like thinking, wow, they must be really having a hard time if they said that to me, right? Or if they ran away, or if they collapsed, right? So again, it's a complete paradigm shift to not focus on the behavior as some kind of willful defiance or lack of motivation, as opposed to, again, they're having a hard time. They're having difficulty meeting expectation. Let me get clear about the expectation that they're having difficulty meeting. And this gets back to one of your earlier questions about, say school refusal. Oh my gosh, that's what we call a clumped problem, right? There are so many things, aspects to getting to school, right? I mean, hundreds, yeah, where you have a kid who maybe is refusing to go to school because some kid said something mean to them the day before, right? And they don't want to see that kid again. Or it could be because they're having difficulty in a certain class and they have a test that day, so they're not going. It could be because they didn't sleep well the night before because they have a stuffy nose, right? There's so many reasons. So again, we have to look at almost, we call it like go as far upstream as we can, right? What was the first moment of difficulty? Because the child who struggles to get out of bed, right? The expectation is you get out of bed at 6:30 a.m. If they're struggling to get out of bed at 6:30, then you're thinking, is it because they difficult for them to sleep? Because again, that could be illness or it could be anxiety, just as 2 examples. So again, this is where, again, I really want parents to be putting on like their little sleuth hat and their little magnifying glass and becoming those stress detectors. Like, what was the earliest sign of stress? And then you want to get curious about that, saying to the kid, what made it hard for you to get up at 6:30 this morning? And they'll tell you. They'll really tell you. And then we just have to, again, believe them, solve it with them, right? But that takes time. So again, I do want to be clear about there's another saying we have, which is choose your hard, right? It's hard to get locked into this power struggles when we think, right? The adult thinks, like you said, we have these theories about what's making it hard. And so we have these solutions that we're handing to them, again, not being really sure with the best of intentions, right? We're trying to help, but not having a good understanding of the problem means that our solution may be ineffective, but it can feel hard if we really think, oh no, I think this would really help you if you would just do it. And then we see them not doing it. Right. So that can be hard to be locked in that sort of power struggle of what I call dueling solutions. Like the kid has a solution perhaps to solve their problem, and the adult has a solution to solve that problem. And then we get stuck there. Right. That's the power struggle. But if we were to again, take the time and the energy needed to understand the problem and solve for the problem, again, it would have a better outcome. But I just want to highlight both are hard, right? Both take a lot of time and energy. And so it's totally understandable that parents often default to, again, what they learned growing up, right? And what they think, right? Their theory that's going to help, even when it doesn't. It makes sense. Don't you think, Jess, that people kind of revert to what they think should work?
Right, absolutely. And so you talked about, like, once you've identified the problem, then you start to work on solving it. And the best way to do that is to ask the child. So how does this approach actually reduce stress and the nervous system overload for the child?
Yes, because again, and this gets back to basic attachment theory that is the foundation for my practice, that human beings are social bonding attachment creatures. And this is where, again, we weren't raised this way, but more and more you're hearing about self-regulation is first learned with co-regulation, right? Like if our earliest caregivers soothed us when we were crying, rather than that kind of idea of like the baby's going to cry it out, to learn, right, how to sleep independently when again was coming to help. So it's not like they became so independent at sleeping, but they just learned, since no one's coming, I'm not going to keep crying. Yeah, that's kind of the attachment theory aspect of it. And so when kids learn from their earliest experiences that their caregivers are going to help them solve the problems that are impacting their lives, again, they don't have the stress response. They don't have those concerning behaviors. And kids really, they want to believe that. But again, very often earliest experiences teach them that it's not true, that they can't turn to their caregivers for help solving their problems, right? Because again, adults were doing their best with limited time, energy, and again, their resources, their understanding of what the problem was. But we can turn this around at any time, Jess. So again, I even work with adult parents and their adult children, like 80-year-old parents with their 50-year-old children, now orienting to this, let's solve these problems together. Yeah. And I just had an 80-year-old father ask me, but how do you shape the behavior without like consequences or, punishments or rewards? And that's how you shape the behavior, because again, you're not going to get those concerning behaviors if you're solving the problems. So that for me is really the most important thing, is that we remember that we're attachment creatures, we're social bonding creatures. We learn to socially, we learn by relying on other people, and that never has to end, right? Not when we're 4, not when we're 40, not when we're 80, that we can keep turning to the people around us and saying, can you help? And when we know we can be helped, our stress reduces exponentially, right?
That correlation is so interesting, because I did raise my children during the time when we just let them cry. And my youngest son, who has 8 neurodiversities, he never stopped crying. Like, he didn't just give up and say, well, they're not coming. He would cry for hours. And I would leave him there crying, and it upset my husband. But I'm like, no, that's what we're supposed to do. And my daughter did the opposite. And so my mother was like, oh, she's holding the baby too much. And, she needs to put her down. And I mean, her house was never clean because she could never put her down. But now my grandbaby is so much more secure. And she was at a year and a half having fits and hitting because she couldn't speak. She couldn't verbalize what she wanted to say. And they were already teaching her a little sign language, so they started teaching her more. And as she learned more sign language, the hitting stopped.
Yes, the stress response, because again, the hitting was, again, in its own way, communication, right? Like I'm not feeling understood, please help me, right? But again, it became a stress response that the nervous system, I just call that unlucky, right? There's kind of like we could roll this four-sided dice when any nervous system is overwhelmed. It could be fight, flight, freeze, or collapse. And then it's just unlucky that very often when that dice is rolled, that it shows up as fight, right? That's just unlucky. And so I'm so glad though that again, your daughter was like, oh my gosh, let's help her. She's clearly struggling to communicate a need, a desire, right? Like the need, again, I would just say a need, let's help her. And so I'm so glad that's a great story.
Yeah. And I mean, it was like within 3 months, the hitting started to reduce. And now it's, 6, 8 months later. And she only hits like when she's really frustrated.
Yes, that's her frustration. Again, it's probably a loaded die at this point. Like it's almost like, if her nervous system gets overwhelmed, you're very likely to see that fight response come out. But again, not to think that, oh, she's so aggressive or violent. Oh, she's really having a hard time. Let's again get curious about what's difficult for her so her nervous system doesn't get frustrated and we don't see that concerning kind of fight response.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. It's so interesting to hear you share all this and like in my mind be able to start putting all these pieces together.
Oh my gosh, it really is dominoes. Like once we can kind of like line them up, everything is understandable. It's like, like they all fall around this like, oh my gosh, I bet they're having a hard time. And if I can figure out what expectation was difficult for them to meet or what that behavior was trying to communicate, right, for the very young ones, where communication is just difficult, then, right, I can understand and help them so that, again, we don't need to have that stress response in the first place. So yeah, just the curiosity and the compassion, again, that they want to do well, that they want to feel understood. Again, it's a very human thing. These are just little human beings who want to feel heard, understood, valued, right, secure, safe. Those are just all of our human needs. And when we can just start from that basis and then they're not being manipulative, maybe they've learned, right? Like certain behaviors are more likely to get a response and they're not adaptive is what we say in the counseling world, right? They're sort of maladaptive, meaning it still gets you, what you attention, the care, but not in the most adaptive way, in the way that it's going to work for everyone, right? That adaptive means collaborative, right? Meaning it's realistic, everyone can do it, and it's mutually satisfactory, like everyone's getting their needs met. And I think that that's another paradigm shift that I would like to offer people is that there really is a way, because there's so many parents who come to me now because there's a lot out about like low demand parenting where we just reduce or remove expectations. But I'm not a fan because again, we don't learn in that environment, right? Again, how we learn, how we develop these skills is through practice. And that gets back to what I was saying before about how do we learn these skills of frustration tolerance, of transitioning easily, of doing tedious or frustrating tasks. It's by doing them, right? That's what increases our capacity. That's what increases our skills.
So for parents, like what is the hardest part for them to start making these shifts?
Yeah, and sadly, the hardest part is that there's very little support in our culture, in the school system, even with our family members, right? Very often there's a mother, a
Like my mother.
exactly, who have their opinions, who have their theories, right, about the best way to raise a child. And so that is definitely the hardest thing, is that there's very little support in our culture for adopting this paradigm
I
shift.
can totally
And so, yeah, but I'm so glad, right, that you've created a community that's really encouraging parents to look at things differently, to really support parents. That's what we need, right, is just as much support for parents as they're navigating this difficulty themselves as helping the child. So again, I think if we can be just so patient and compassionate with ourselves as parents that we really are doing the best we can with limited support, then it just makes everything easier. Another thing that I really encourage is just what I call kind of that transparency to tell a kid like, hey, I haven't really been happy with the way our communication has been going or with the way I've been handling, the difficulty in the morning, getting on the school bus, and I'd really like to do things differently. And I'm not going to do it perfectly, right? I'm going to really have some missteps or some, I'm going to make mistakes. And oh my gosh, just that in itself is so healing for the relationship. For kids to be like, wait, you make mistakes? Because again, kids just think they're the problem, right? That they're the ones who are having the hard time. They're the ones who are messing up. They're the ones who aren't meeting expectations. And so for parents to be able to say, hey, I'm struggling to meet my own expectations, to, meet you with curiosity and compassion, and for us to solve these problems together, right? And so you're not alone in this. And kids really are like, like really, really, you struggle with this too. I'll never forget. My son's now 21 years old, and I just really started adopting this lens shift when he was 10, and really started to do a lot more of that transparency, like, hey, I'm struggling too. This isn't the way my parents parented me, so I'm having a hard time. And I'll never forget my kids saying, you're having a hard time too, you also make mistakes. So yeah, that's what I would really encourage for parents is to realize how hard this is and how much we would all benefit, again, for ourselves and for our kids to have this self-compassion, to have this patience for ourselves, to really realize, call it the long game, right? We're not going to adopt this lens shift and then everything is easy, right? It's, again, we're learning a new skill. It's going to take a lot of time and practice for us to be able to do it reliably.
And this is selfish, but a selfish question. But for parents who have already finished raising their children, how would you recommend, translating that statement to them? Like, I'm not doing any parenting anymore, but I'm sorry that the way that I understood parenting should be didn't turn out to be the best way.
Yes, it would be such great conversations because, again, one, you are still parenting them, right? As long as they haven't gone no contact, which is really an interesting phenomenon with adult children going non-contact because the relationship is still so adversarial. Again, this kind of power over that the older, the adult parents are having over their adult child. And again, just hoping to be helpful, but not helping. So the first is to understand that, again, whether your child is 4 or 40, they don't stop needing you to be their parent, period. Right. And again, you may feel more distance from them, and that's likely due to the sense that they have internalized the sense that I can't go to mom, and not feel judged. So again, if you're noticing more distance, what I would say to the parents of adult children is to name that, like, hey, I'm noticing I'm not feeling as close to you. And I wonder if it's because, right, you may still feel kind of judged with me because I know I judged you when you were a child, or that you don't feel right, or you feel pressured to do things my way because, again, that was what I knew was I helped you when I kind of imposed the solution, and I don't want to do things that way anymore, right? If you're having a problem raising your own kid, I promise you, I'm not going to be like, well, you should do this. I'm going to ask you more questions like, well, what do you think is hard for your baby? Like, what do you think is hard for you in this? And let's solve that together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because again, another whole facet of my work is not only working with parents of young children, but it's working with parents of adult children to repair those ruptures that happened in that child's earliest childhood. And it's never too late. The point is, it's never too late to repair it. Again, working with 80-year-old parents and 47-year-old adult children. And as long as one of them wants a different relationship and the others are open, everything can change very quickly. Yeah.
Okay. And kind of on a different note, but what would you say to the parent who feels like if I don't push, nothing will get done?
Mm-hmm. I would just say try something else, right? Because you've probably noticed that if I don't push, nothing gets done, probably yields a lot of power struggles and not a lot getting done. Yeah, so that's one is first noticing, is that actually working? And if they're like, well, sometimes, or it's the only thing, again, I would just ask you, like, would you be willing to do things a different way? Where again, you're going to meet the child and say, hey, I've been noticing it's difficult for you to do X, right? That thing that we were pushing them to do before, right? With this unilateral solution, like, I've decided that because you're having a hard time completing your math worksheet, you don't get the iPad until after you've done it, right? That's just a simple example. But if you're going to say to the child, hey, I've been noticing, right, that it doesn't feel good when I issue this consequence, like if you don't do the math worksheet, you don't get the iPad. And again, sometimes it's yielded compliance. Sometimes you've done it, but it doesn't feel good, right? I don't like doing it. You don't seem to like it. So how about if we do something different? How about if we start talking about what's making it hard for you, right? Where I'm coming a lot more with curiosity about what's making it hard rather than coming at you with a solution that I'm imposing. Yeah, like no iPad until you finish the worksheet. So I would just say, just try it. Just try it. Again, your kid's going to be probably a little wary at first, probably a little distrusting, or like, what's because it's again, it's gonna be hard for them to trust if they've been handed these unilateral solutions in the past. But if the parent again is willing because they don't like how it feels to be kind of locked in these power struggles of imposing solutions, even though sometimes they work, then to just keep at it, right? And again, imperfectly. I don't think anyone's going to do it perfectly. Certainly not out of the jump. What's so great about starting early with kids, because again, I started with my son when he was 10 and now he's 21, is that once they believe it and once you just stay with it long enough, they will then model for you, right? My son calls it the solutions thing. Like he will now say to me, like when he notices that I'm having a frustration response, or he's noticing that, again, we're kind of in that dueling solutions place again, because again, it's a default that he will say faster than I will, hey mom, let's do that solutions thing, right? Where I share with you what my concern is, you share with your concern is, and then we solve it together, right? In a way that's realistic, meaning we can both do it, and that it's mutually satisfactory, meaning it meets your concern and it meets my concern. So that will it blew my mind. I'll just say that when my son said to me, hey mom, I see you're having a hard time. Let's do that solutions thing together.
So when you were sharing made me think about very often parents will say, well, I don't know if my child will be on board for tutoring. Usually it's the older student who really, really needs it, right? Because they're on a third or fifth grade reading level in high school. And I always tell the parents, well, if your child's not on board, there's no point in tutoring because it's a waste of the tutor's time, it's a waste of your money, and the child's just gonna be more frustrated. But I wonder if you have a better solution to help the child get on board, because ultimately it's their life that is being affected by them not being willing to get proper instruction.
Yes. So again, it's kind of a framework, right? So it would be like, hey, I've noticed you're having a hard time reading, right? Can you describe to me, right? I think I might know, or we've talked about it before, but this is the framework, right? We really want to understand what's making it difficult for them. And so then they can say, like, the letters are jumbled on the page, or it's just too overwhelming, or I'm just stupid, right? Like they'll give you their reasons, what's making it hard for them to read. And then you will ask them, right, this sort of like of all those things that you said, right? And you don't even argue with them, right? Even when they say, I'm stupid, you're like, okay, so you think it's because you're stupid that you can't read. Like you just hold it lightly, right? Like you don't argue anything. You don't say, I don't think that's true, or that's not right. You're just like, tell me more, tell me more. What is it about being stupid that makes it hard for you to read, right? Do you see like how that kind of gets, and they'll be sort of like, because again, that's their theory. That's their theory for why it's hard for them to read, that they're just dumb, right? But when you're asked, like, how does being dumb make it hard for you to read? Then you get, right, like that better information. So at the end, right, you said anything else, and then when they say no, you're like, okay, of all of those reasons, what is your priority concern, or what's making it most difficult for you to read? And again, very often they'll be like, I can't make sense of the letters on the page. And that's like, okay, that's very interesting, right? And then the second step is the adult shares their concern, right? Which is, my concern is when it's difficult for you to read, I feel concerned about your learning, period, right? You don't need to give any more, like we have too many theories, too many explanations, too many soapboxes, but kids really just prefer, right? When we can kind of focus our concerns around a few areas. And one is safety, one is health, one is learning, and the other is what I call like fairness or the relationship. But in this case, it's very clearly like, I feel concerned about your learning and I want to help. And the third step is that solutions step where it's like, okay, given that the words look scrambled on the page and my concern about your learning, what do you think? What do you think would be a solution to this? And again, very often kids will have a solution, and then you just weigh it against, is it realistic, meaning we can all do it? And then two, is it mutually satisfactory, meaning does it meet their concern about the letters scrambled on the page, and does it meet our concern for their learning, right? So again, very often kids might be like, well, I don't have to go to school. And so then you can just say, well, how does that meet your concern about the letters being scrambled on the page, right? So that's where it brings us back to sort of reality, right? Like we kind of don't leave the table until we find that solution that is in fact realistic, meaning everyone can do it, and mutually satisfactory, meaning it meets their concern about the letters and ours about learning. And again, we may not be able to do this in one sitting. Sometimes we're like, well, it's great that we got more insight into what's hard for you. I'm glad you were able to hear what my concern is. Let's stay with this and just see if anything comes up. But anyway, I always give the kid the first like shot at the solution. And then if they're like, I don't know, then we can say, well, I was thinking maybe tutoring might help because that means you would work with a dedicated specialist, how the letters get scrambled on the page, and they have some great strategies for helping with that. Would you be willing? Right? Would you be willing to try that? We could just try it for one time. You could see if you liked it, if you got along with, the tutor. What do you think? And again, kids are so reasonable. Like again, I think because we get into these fight, flight, freeze, and collapse reactions so often, and we get stuck and then, right, like exhausted by them, we don't actually see our kids being so reasonable. And so in that case, I I mean, I've always seen there's never been a time where a kid, if they didn't have a solution that was realistic and mutually satisfactory, and I do say, give the kid the win, even if you're like, I don't think that's going to work. Let's just see, because again, no solution is set in stone. So let's say that the kid was I'm gonna have to give another example because in fact with this like tutoring example the kid was totally open even though at first they were like no tutor, but when they were taken through this process of mom and dad were willing to hear my solutions but they weren't realistic or mutually satisfactory, so now I'm more open to their solution because I felt heard. Right, that's the kid, like I felt heard. I didn't feel bulldozed. I didn't feel like it was just imposed on me, but I felt heard. I felt understood. They're proposing something that sounds realistic and mutually satisfactory, so I'm going to go with it, right? But I'll just give you an example really quick of the kid wanted the gerbil but wasn't keeping the cage clean, and that was the expectation. Like, okay, if you're gonna have a gerbil, you have to keep the cage clean. And then the parents noticed that the child was having difficulty keeping the cage clean, and the parent asked, like, what's making it hard? And they said, because the gerbil bit them. Like when they tried to bring the gerbil out of the cage, it would bite them. So they were like, I can't take the gerbil out of the cage. And so then the kid actually came up with, what if we got one of those cages where there's like a little tunnel between two separate cages, and then I could get the gerbil to go into the one cage by putting a treat in there, then closing it off, and then cleaning the cage, right? But that would require the parents to buy a new cage, right? So again, it seemed like, oh, I could see how that could solve the problem of getting bitten by the gerbil. But that new cage costs like $40, right? So again, that could have been where the child had a really great solution, but it wasn't actually realistic, right? Like the parents couldn't afford the thing. So in the example of the tutoring, maybe the child would say, yeah, a tutor would be great. And I know, so-and-so has a tutor. And then you found out that tutor was like, I don't know, $200 an hour. And you were again like, oh, that's not going to fit. Would you be willing to, could we find another tutor? Yeah. So again, we have to be kind of ready to address these objections. But again, I have never, right? I've worked with hundreds of families. I've never found a child not open to a solution when again, they felt heard, they felt understood, they felt respected in the process. So if a parent did find that their kid, was shutting down, I would be very curious. Like I do a lot of coaching around, like I watch the parent do this model with their kid, and it's almost always like if it's not working, it's because they're inserting adult theories or they're arguing them about that's not true when they're sharing their concerns. So it's like there's always a reason why it's not working is my point. But when we are really just stay in that curiosity, stay in that compassion, I would say we always find a solution.
I know I struggle with just being curious, and because I have so many solutions in my mind that I want to give them my solutions. And now that my kids are adults, they don't want me to solve their problems because I did it their whole childhood.
Yes.
So
Oh, it's so great. I love when you just have that transparency, that vulnerability, that's hard for me. And again, that's what I'm encouraging your listeners to do is to admit what's hard, right? To say, it's hard for me. I think I want to save you from this heartache, from this feeling stupid, from this frustration response. And I think I have a really great solution. But yeah, so often, if that's not working for your child, because some kids are like, great, give me the solution, and they run with it. But again, we're talking about the kids who don't run with it. And if those kids aren't running with that solution that was a really great theory on your part, it's because we need to do it another way. So again, I'm like all about like, hey, if that works for you, go for it. But if it doesn't, really drill down in the empathy, part and the curiosity part, and you're going to get a much different response.
now I need to take a moment and share with you what dyslexia is.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
your example
Yes.
is what most people think dyslexia is.
Thank you.
And it's very important to me to make sure that people understand, especially
Yes.
a therapist who,
Yes.
can help kids be directed in the right direction. So
Yes, please.
dyslexia is difficulty with words. It's
Yes.
difficulty with reading words, difficulty with spelling words, and difficulty with communicating words.
Yes.
So it's the sounds, it's putting the sounds together to create words. It's not the letters jumbled up.
Oh, and is
It's
that dysgraphia? Is that
no, that
what?
is
What is it?
actually
Okay.
it's Erlin syndrome or scotopic syndrome.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, so reversals and letters and words moving on the page are
Yes.
not dyslexia.
Yes.
Now, often people with dyslexia can have
Got it.
those challenges, and so that's why it's been why Americans have come to believe that that is what dyslexia is. And I've had many students who have not gotten the help they need because they didn't reverse any of their letters. And so they're like, well, it's not dyslexia. But
Mm-hmm.
that is not truly what dyslexia is.
That is so great. Thank you so much. That's again that feedback loop that I'm talking about, that we can have these theories and they're just incorrect. And so we
Right.
just need to like dispel that so quickly. So thank you
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much for that. That's so helpful. And I'm sure your listeners are like, yeah, but if it helps anyone else that struggles with that understanding, I'm so glad that I could be that person that you could say, wait, we're gonna stop right here and make sure that you leave with a good understanding
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
dyslexia.
And so if you ever, are working with someone who has jumbled letters or reverses, I mean, not reverses, but with the letters, with the words moving on the page or things like that, Erlin.com is a website where they can get colored overlays, and the colored overlays can change their life because the black writing on the white paper is hard for their eyes to see
Mhm.
and to focus on. So
That is so fascinating. That's so great. I'm so glad. Well, again, that's another huge area that I think that people are getting better and better about, because we're not seeing that like in a counseling environment where, parents are coming to us and saying, they have these learning issues. And so I think that I mean, is it your experience that people are finding it earlier and earlier, that they're identifying the actual problem that is making it difficult to read?
So yes and no.
Yes.
I think parents are becoming more aware that there's a problem and relying less on the school to identify it. But unfortunately, the schools well, some schools are starting to identify a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
but some still, like, they won't ever identify dyslexia. They will call it an other learning impaired and things like that. So that's where the yes and no is.
Yes, gotcha. Best answers, and I didn't use it in this, so I would again, when you said, what about if this is happening, I'm gonna, yeah, tie into what you said and say, again, it depends. And so please be curious about, your child and what's making it difficult for them, right? Because there could be so many things that we're not even aware of, as we saw with me and not understanding dyslexia. I think that that's a great metaphor for so many parents who think they know, right? But they don't actually know. And so to be open to receiving feedback, to be open to trying different things, to be open really to communicate to the child. I'll never forget, again, I said I work with a lot of adult children and their parents. And I'll never forget working with this 38-year-old man, and his parents said, we tried everything, right? And nothing worked. And so they didn't literally say we gave up, but that was what was implied. And that's how the kid felt, was that my parents just gave up on me. But even before they could finish that, when they were like, we tried everything and nothing worked. And this 38-year-old man said, but I would never stop trying. Like, he didn't have his own kids, but he was like, if I had a kid, I would never stop trying, right? To find the thing that would work. And then just felt like there was nothing and collapsed in the face of it. That would be their own nervous system overwhelm and collapse, I think. But I think if we can really lean into that adult child, that 38-year-old man who said, let's never stop trying to figure out what's at the root of these learning issues, what's at the root of these behavioral concerns, right? This concerning behavior, then that would feel really good to the kid, right? To be like, hey, we've tried some things. I see they're still not helping. Let's keep trying. Yeah, because I never want you to feel at the end of the day that it's hopeless, or that we're not going, right? Like, we're going to leave you
Right.
alone in this. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a great place to always orient to.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time. Let's talk about your book that you have coming out, the PDA Kids Solution.
Yes.
What inspired you to write this book?
Yes, really practice. So if your listeners aren't familiar with it, because it's really a relatively new understanding of, in particular, neurodivergence. And again, why I reached out to you is because I think that there is so much overlap between kids who struggle with learning differences and this PDA profile. So PDA, as it's come across the pond, right, it was first studied and kind of described literature in England in the early 80s, and so it was described as pathological demand avoidance. And again, it was seen as a subset of autism, but now we don't look at it that way. We don't even think that you have to have, like, it's neurotype free, like it doesn't have to be a certain neurotype. But we're seeing are these traits, right, of overwhelm, of nervous system overwhelm, and why we're looking at it as, again, the it's named pathological demand avoidance, but from my perspective, we're reframing it as persistent desire for autonomy, because autonomy is, again, as human beings, we have two, I think, equal drives. One is for autonomy, right? To be able to have the agency, the ability to make choices that impact our lives, right? That we get to have a say, that's autonomy. And then two, it's interconnectedness, right? It's that we're social bonding creatures and we feel safest when we're in safe relationships, and we learn best when we're in safe environments. And so I think, again, there's this kind of overlap between kids who feel like, again, misunderstood around their learning differences, and then that can create, right, that feeling of unsafety, which then can look like, either the defiance, right, the refusal, but really it's just a nervous system response to, like, I don't feel safe in this environment, so I'm going to seek autonomy, right, safety through, like, avoidance. Yeah. And so my book is about how can we meet these kids where they are? Because again, they're not being defiant, they're not being oppositional for the sake of, willful defiance. They're really struggling with a problem that they need adults, caring people to solve with them. And again, it's just a perfect parallel or connection with your community, because again, you're trying to help a child solve a problem, right? Like, how can we help you learn? How can we help you feel smart and effective and, right, powerful? Yeah, that's what we all want for our kids, right? Empowered. When I say that, we want them to feel empowered, yeah, with learning, but also by understanding themselves and their nervous systems. So this is what the book is about, and it will be published on the shelves in September 2027. But I'm just really enjoying connecting with different communities to talk about, again, these overlaps and how this new lens for looking at our kids with curiosity and compassion could benefit all populations.
And will it be available in audiobook for our dyslexic parent listeners?
Yes, it is in my contract. So I just signed this contract in January of 2026, and it's in my contract that if the written book does well, then they will. That's,
Okay.
like the publishers, they're like, we're not going to put any more money into this unless we
Uh-huh.
see that it's going to make money. So let's drive strong sales to the written book, and then there can be an audio book. And so that's what we're really hoping that will happen very quickly after the print book is available.
Amazing. Yeah, because I know as a dyslexic person,
Mhm.
I very often will choose to listen to an audio version
Yes.
versus pull out a book.
Of course, that's true. Look at you, your little business
See,
entrepreneur.
that's
Yeah.
that's that's why I have a very hard time just saying, what do you think? Because ideas come into my head
And I
and
love them. And again, they're going to work for a lot of people. So I don't want you to discourage from saying, oh, do you think you could do this? Like, that's beautiful. The only correction slowing it down is if you notice that the person's like, no, that's not going to work for me
okay.
or whatever, like that. That's the only little nuance that I would offer, because I love your brain and I love your solutions, and they work for so many people. So I'm so glad.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. And so
Yeah.
you were generous enough to offer a free resource
Yes.
to our listeners. Can you
Yes.
tell us about it and how parents can access
Yes. So it's called the Defiance Decoder. So it really does just go through, like, if you hear this, you see this, right? Like, think about that, right? Like, it really, again, if the biggest takeaway is that we're seeing this concerning behavior because there is an unsolved problem. So again, just working with hundreds of families, I've kind of created this master list of, like, if this, then that. And so that is a free resource I would love to offer your listeners. And they can find it by going to ashevillefamilycounseling.com/podcast-gift. But if you put it on your listener notes,
Yeah,
you
we
find it
will.
easier than trying to get that down. But it is, just a thank you for your listeners for being here with us. And I hope they find it a helpful resource.
Thank you. And you've given so many amazing tips, but if there was one thing that you wanted every parent of a neurodivergent child or demand sensitive child to understand, what would that be?
Yeah, I'm going to end like I did in the beginning, and it's really to lean into curiosity. If they can just get curious, right? Instead of having this, again, idea, theory about what's making it hard, to actually ask the kid what's hard, that would be wonderful. So much could change right in that moment.
Thank you so much. This conversation has been such an important reminder that what we see on the surface may only be part of the story. And when our child is avoiding, shutting down, or refusing, there's always something else underneath it. Mm-hmm. And when we take the time to understand that, everything can start to shift. Mm-hmm. At 3D Learning Experts, that is exactly how we approach our work. We do not just look at the outcome. We look at the why behind it, and whether your student is struggling with reading, spelling, writing, math, or feeling overwhelmed by demands placed on them, we focus on identifying the specific skill gaps and learning challenges that we can support them in a way that actually makes sense to how their brain works, because real progress does not come from pressure. It comes from the right support and a deeper understanding of the child in front of us. If this conversation resonated with you and you are ready to better understand your child and get them the support they need, reach out to 3D Learning Experts, and we can help take the next step with clarity and confidence. And thank you again for being here, Stacey, and our guests. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Empowered Parent Podcast.
Thank you so much, Jess. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.